Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Empowering Safety, Material Handling in the Steel Industry. My name is Jack Minnix, and I am a Consulting Services Manager at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, and I'm pleased to be your host for today's Safety Connection. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Firstly, your computer audio is best for this webinar. We recommend that you mute any other devices in order to avoid distractions. We'll be using the chat feature in Microsoft Teams for all comments and questions. And finally, your microphone will remain muted throughout the webinar, and you will not have the ability to turn your camera on. You may send your questions to us at any time during the session through the chat feature. The chat can be accessed by clicking on the speech bubble icon on your screen. We will also have time for a question and answer and discussion period at the end of this presentation if you have any additional questions. Just a few notes on our goals for the session today. Our hope through the Safety Connection is that it helps us to stay in touch and to connect virtually with industry peers. It provides an efficient opportunity to attend from your personal workspace. We're hoping that today's session will facilitate an exchange of best practices within the steel industry and with the organizations involved. And we hope that you'll find today's session will help you to learn, to share, and to discover what is of value to you. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Firstly, Carl Bonello. Carl Bonello is a health and safety professional with over 20 years of health and safety experience. Carl joined Workplace Safety and Prevention Services in September of 2015 and provides consulting and training programs to companies in Ontario. Carl holds a designation as a Canadian registered safety professional, and he specializes in material handling and leadership development. In addition to Carl's CRSP, he also has the PMM, or Professional of Materials Management designation with the Materials Handling Management Society of Ontario. Carl's got a wealth of experience in automotive manufacturing, where he has a proven track record of developing and implementing safety program elements, including material handling programs, training sessions, leadership coaching, health and safety audits, and risk assessments. Don McInnes. Don McInnes is one of the Southwestern Regional Program Coordinators at the Ontario Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. Don supports occupational health and safety inspectors by acting as a subject matter expert on the application of the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations. Don works provincially on a variety of committees regarding policies and procedures, Healthcare Provincial Program Advisory Committee, quality assurance programs, and issues specific to the industrial and healthcare programs of the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. Would you please join me in welcoming to the table Carl and Don. And Carl, I'm going to hand control of the program over to you now. And Carl, I'll monitor the chat off camera, but if you want to check in with me anytime, I'll let you know if there's any questions.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everybody. I'm extremely excited to be here today. Hope you guys all find this very informative. We're going to run through kind of a quick hour. I'm hoping that at the end you have some really good questions for Don and myself, and really kind of get into some of the material handling aspects at your workplace. So let's just get started and we'll kind of go through it. First of all, we're going to review safety hazards found in the material handling area. We're going to provide insights into the types of controls that we can start using to make sure that we mitigate those hazards. We're going to discuss areas for the focus of the MLITSD. And that's one of the big things for today is getting your questions ready so that we can answer them at the end. And then discuss ways to protect our workers. So hopefully this is a really informative session for everybody, and we're going to get started. So the top handling contraventions. So what are some of the things that the MLITSD are looking for? Specifically for material handling, they would be the improper movement of materials. So how are materials moved from point A to point B? And then the other one was workers standing in the shadow of a load. So anytime that we have a load that is suspended in the air, we should be very aware of maybe some of the people or some of the things that are underneath it. And we should always be aware that there could be a hazard there. The other big top contraventions would be lifting devices. So for cranes, having hooks with no or missing latches on there, or again, operators working within the shadow of the load. So as you can see here, it is covered under the material handling and the lifting devices, where there has been workers, when we have cranes that are lifting things, people might be walking underneath them. So these are some of the top contraventions that we've seen. Some of the focus areas by the MLITSD are going to be manufacturing facilities that create, store, and transport steel. So that's why this presentation was created, to kind of focus in on the steel industry. And then also workplaces that manufacture items that use process involving large equipment to move products. So if we need to move bins, tanks, drums, and coils, etc., that's what the also focus of this is going to be. Job task in the industrial workplace. So things that could increase our chances of coming in contact with these hazards could be cleaning in and around equipment, pedestrian traffic around moving equipment and machinery, which we're going to be talking about very soon, repairing or adjusting of equipment, lift truck operators around storage systems, and then manual material handling. So all of those are the items that we're going to be discussing today. Orders by section. I found this is very interesting. So the frequency of orders is listed on the side with the section. So obviously we have section 25, the duties of the employer was our top contravention. And then we kind of get into the OREG 851, which is section 51. And then those are the lifting device section. Policies, violence and harassment are in there. Employers, joint health and safety committees, in-running nip hazards for any part of a machine are in there. Non-compliance, materials, articles, or things. Section 45 is another really big one that I deal with quite often. Material, articles, or things should not be moved, transported in a way that can, tip, fall, and injure a worker. And then Section 11 in Regulation 851 talks about a floor or other surface has to be kept free of any kind of hazards, right? So these are the top orders that are issued by the MLITSD. Additional orders, some of the examples that I wanted to pull from this as well. Lift truck training was a really big one. So ensuring that your lift truck operators are properly trained and that they're competent. We are going to be talking about competency quite a bit in here as well, which I think is a really big topic for a lot of workplaces lately, is making sure that people are competent and also that the trainers who train the people on the fork trucks are competent as well. Lighting is another big one, making sure that we have adequate lighting in our facilities. Audible control, so noise, and then PPE requirements in the workplace, whether it be gloves, safety glasses, hearing protection, those types of things. Okay, and these are all from the orders from last year. All right, so we're going to jump right into it, everybody. These are the 5 crucial areas of our material handling areas in our workplaces. We have lift trucks and pedestrians. We have racking structures, loading docks, conveyors, and cranes. So we're going to be talking about each one of these in depth, and then we're going to have kind of a wrap up at the end of each module. All right, so lift trucks and pedestrians. Probably one of the biggest topics I have been dealing with in the last little while would be fork trucks and pedestrians in the workplace. The 3 most common forklift related fatalities involve forklifts that are flipping over, workers struck on foot by a fork truck, and then workers falling from a fork truck. These 3 things get looked at quite often in an industrial warehouse, and these are things that we need to be looking for as well. Other common hazards, especially for fork trucks, would be battery handling. I know a lot of workplaces have the battery typed forklifts or other movers. People need to be aware that there are definitely hazards with those. That could be the battery acid could be accessed when filling or servicing them. There could be gases that are produced when we are recharging them. There could be electrical shock, and then there could be just the weight of the actual batteries. The other one are attachments. This one needs to be looked at as well, where if you start adding attachments to fork trucks, you need to be very aware of training to make sure that our drivers are trained on those attachments, that their clearances are looked at, their capabilities, and then if there's any type of like electrical connections with them, there could be an electrical shock. Propane refilling. Some of us are pretty aware of these propane refilling hazards. They could be exposed to the propane gas themselves. It is a flammable gas, and it is a combustible byproduct. And then there is a certain weight to these as well. So all of those need to be taken into account, even in like an ergonomics assessment, needs to be looked at how we are transporting the propane refueling. And my big one as well is making sure that there's proper PPE when doing a propane tank changeover, right? We should be looking for that people have been trained on how to do the propane tank changes, that they have the proper PPE, and that it's being audited and enforced. Just some stats for lift trucks. One of the ones that we're going to be getting into next is pedestrians struck by vehicles. The one conversation I have with the MLITSD is that they really want to see that you have evaluated all of your risks when you have employees interacting with any kind of motorized vehicle. How do we want people to go from point A to point B? How are we going to do that safely? So again, we've done a lot of pedestrian traffic assessments recently, and that's kind of a question that some companies have never even thought of. Okay. So what factors increase the risk of pedestrian lift truck incidents? So if we were just to take a look at this picture right here, this is a very common type of picture that we would have in a lot of manufacturing places. What types, and if you want to throw this in the chat, please go ahead, but what types of things do you see here that might become an issue or might become a hazard for people that we should be taking a look at in our spaces? Anybody want to chime in with this one? What are some things that you notice here? Distracted pedestrians, inattention by the pedestrians. A lot of people have not considered having like a distracted policy where it's not okay to have people on cell phones while they're walking, which is a good one. Blind spot corners, right? We have a corner with a blind spot for the pedestrian and for the driver. Cell phone use on the shop floor, absolutely. No aisles marked, absolutely. There should be dedicated pedestrian walkways as well as dedicated drive aisles for this, right? Lighting, some people have said there's inadequate lighting. The other one I like to look at is, oh, what does Charmaine say? Pedestrians wearing hearing protection and not hearing the fork truck. Absolutely. There's a lot of really good things in this picture that we can take away, that we could take a look at our own workplace and see what do we have in store. The other one is restricted areas, right? Do we have restricted areas? Is this person even supposed to be there? Right? Maybe this is like a loading dock and maybe they're not supposed to be there, right? So there's a lot of factors that we look into, especially when we are looking at pedestrian traffic assessments, as to try to eliminate the interaction between pedestrians and fork trucks. So I encourage you to definitely take a look at your pedestrian walkways, your drive aisles. Could we eliminate people altogether, right? Those are really big questions that we should be asking at our workplace to try and minimize the risk of a collision. Okay. So as we talked about, there's no designated areas, lack of barriers. Maybe we would have some barriers there if we needed to. Maybe there's rules in place for walking and talking or walking and texting. Flow of traffic's not designed very well. Not following the rules. Maybe perhaps the driver's speeding. No high vis clothes. Maybe there's a rule about wearing high vis clothes in a certain area. High loads on the lift truck, and then high pallet loads as well. But the big one here is distractions, right? We should really be making sure that there's rules and policies and procedures in place for that, and that they're being enforced. Okay. Just some high level regulations for this. This is the one that I deal with quite often, is Section 20 of the Industrial Regulations, where it basically states that barriers, warning signs, or other safeguards for the protection of all workers in an area shall be used where vehicles or pedestrians may endanger the safety of a worker. So for me, this depends. It depends on, do I need a barrier? Do I need warning signs or other safeguard? It depends on your risk factors. So do I have a lot of people and do I have a lot of vehicles interacting? If so, I would probably want to have more barriers. If I only have one fork truck and maybe one person in an area, maybe I don't need physical barriers. Maybe I could just have, painted walkways, maybe some administrative controls, maybe a high vis vest. Those types of controls might be better as well. But that's the big one I see, is that you need to have something in place when it comes to people and vehicle interaction. Okay, there's just some other ones in there. The other one is a signal person to direct mobile equipment cranes. If the person, if their line of sight is blocked, powered equipment shall not be left unattended unless the forks, buckets, or blades are in the lowered position and solidly blocked. And there's just this is just a general idea for. I'm not going to read them all for you, but these are just the general ones that we deal with quite often when it comes to material handling. Some of the codes, standards, and guidelines that we also look for as well is the fire code. Now, again, I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible. What in the fire code could be violated when or looked at when we are looking at our own workplace? What kinds of things should we be looking at our workplace that might violate the fire code, let's say? If you want to throw it in the chat, that would be great. Fantastic. If you can kind of think about those types of things. Fire extinguishers, right? Absolutely, it's a big one. Exits should be cleared. Access to fire equipment should be there for sure. Propane storage, you guys are hitting them all. Fire suppression system, all those things. Storage of flammable materials. I love all of these. These are great, guys. Storage, yeah, storage. Blocked exits, signage. Not blocking any type of the fire suppression systems. Sprinkler heads, right? Especially when we talk about racking on the top of racking. There should be at least a minimum 18 inches from a sprinkler head to any kind of material. So all of these things kind of look into place. There's a lot of CSA standards. So again, if you have any of these things in your workplace, you should, really verify or look through some of the CSA standards to see if you're in compliance or if there's anything else that you could work on. So B335, again, safety standard for lift trucks. So if you have lift trucks, it's a really good CSA standard to kind of get into about training, about competency of your drivers, competency of your instructors. Cranes, overhead cranes. The MLITSD has a great guideline for safe operation of fork trucks. There's the A344 user guide for steel storage racks, which was just updated. Ergonomics, safeguarding machinery, and then lockout tagout. Right, there's a whole lot of really good things that you can take a look at for CSA standards. So these are the suggested next steps for like pedestrian and for vehicle. So ensure that lifting devices are maintained, annually inspected by a competent person, and clearly marked with your maximum rated loads. So again, if I was to kind of go through your workplace, these are some of the things that I would be looking for specifically for any kind of lifting devices, right? They need to be shown that they're being maintained properly and a record is there on site so that we can take a look at those records. Ensure there are procedures for vehicle pre-start checks and reporting deficiencies. So it's not just good enough anymore to have like a pre-use inspection on a piece of paper where if the driver has a nonconformance, like their horn doesn't work, they just put it as a no and then they shove it away and it doesn't even get looked at. There should be a clear process where if you have a pre-use inspection, that any nonconformances have to be addressed before they're allowed to operate it, and that the leader for that person is reviewing those and addressing any nonconformances in a timely manner. Okay. Ensure there's proof of training specific to the equipment and devices being used. So again, nobody should be using a piece of equipment unless they've been properly trained, and that there's proof of that on the job site. Audit and enforce that loads are properly balanced and prevent it from shifting, tipping, or falling. Again, it's this auditing and enforcing. If we don't audit things, things will never get better, right? So making sure that our leaders are competent to know what to look for when it comes to material handling equipment, and that they are looking for it and they're correcting any type of nonconformances in the workplace. I'd like to see those types of corrections done at the workplace. Proper training, actually, so that's a really good question. I think we'll address that at the end. But auditing and enforcing seatbelts. So it is legally mandatory for a forklift driver to be wearing a seatbelt at all times while they're in the driving position. So making sure that that is being done and it's audited and enforced as well. Ensure that drivers are loading and unloading materials safely, right? So auditing them and enforcing that they're loading and unloading racking, let's say, or trailers, or even load stations properly, and that they're not, taking unnecessary risks. Check to see if you have distracted or impaired driving procedures, right? A great question is, do we have a distracted pedestrian policy or procedure? Are they allowed to use cell phones in the workplace? Are they allowed to have earbuds in, right? Are supervisors allowed to do that as well? So things just to have a look for back at your workplace. Ensure that the equipment being used is suitable for the task. I'm a big believer with this, especially with fork trucks. Are we using the right equipment for the job? Right? Why are we using a 20,000-pound fork truck when the most I'm ever going to lift is 800 pounds? Right? So maybe using the proper piece of equipment for the task could help out with a lot of other things. And then ensure that you have done a pedestrian traffic assessment, right? To determine if there's any gaps, right? There's a lot of really good resources. We have some resources on the WSPS.ca website that are really, really good if you wanted to do your own, or if you wanted to reach out to a specialist to have them take a look at your pedestrian traffic to see if there's any gaps in your system. Okay. So again, these topics, you guys, are really kind of quick. We're going to jump right next to racking. So what does your racking need to look like? What are some areas that we could be working on? Right, some of the risks that we have with racks, they're loaded over capacity. So again, as an employer, I should be ensuring that my racking structures are not overloaded. There should be some signage to indicate to you what their maximum rated loads are. Some of the other risks are the total or a partial collapse of the racking. Falls while ascending or descending. So again, nobody should be climbing or descending from the racking at all. The other big one that I see is falling loads, right? So there should never be a time when a load falls off a racking structure, either pushed from the back, or if it falls from like a broken pallet, or it's not being placed or descended properly. Damaged pallets is another one that we tend to look at quite often. We should be inspecting our pallets on a regular basis and ensure that they are in good quality condition so that things will not break or fall apart when we are loading or unloading our racks. Inadequate clearances. So again, if anybody's taken the CSA racking course, there's quite a discussion about clearances on the sides and on the top, and we kind of get into what that needs to look like. The other one is broken strapping. Strapping, so everything should be secured to a pallet. So everything on a racking structure should be secured some way, whether it's strapped, whether it's shrink wrapped, whether it's bolted. So again, nothing should be able to tip, fall, and injure a worker. So if I am taking a load off of a racking structure, nothing should be able to fall down onto either the operator or a pedestrian down. So just some background legislation. Again, this one is a big one. If you want to look more into this, OREG 851, section 45 and 46 really talks about material handling. And then, which basically says what I was mentioning before, is that material, articles, or things required to be lifted, carried, or moved shall be lifted, carried, or moved in such a way with precautions and safeguards, including protective clothing, guards, or other precautions, as will ensure that the lifting, carrying, and moving of materials, article, things does not endanger any worker. Also, nothing should be transported, placed, or stored so that material, articles, or things will not tip, collapse, or fall, and can be removed or withdrawn without endangering the safety of a worker. Okay. In 46, it talks about machine, equipment, or materials that may tip and fall and endanger a worker shall be secured against tipping and falling. So however you want to do that is up to you, but you have to ensure that nothing will be able to tip, fall, and injure a worker. Okay, whether it be strapped, banded, or bolted. Okay. Some of the things that we typically look for, especially when we're doing a walkthrough in facilities, we're looking for damaged frames or columns, so the ones that go straight up and down. How things are removed, especially with the safety bars are in consistent placement. Bracing, missing anchor bolts, dislodged dented beams, again missing safety pins, row spacers, storage practices, and then any other items that are included in the CSA user guide. There's quite a big list of things that you should be looking for. And also in my discussions with the MLITSD inspectors, I know in this area, is they want to make sure that the people that are doing your racking inspections are deemed competent, right? So they know about the hazards, they know about the legislation, and that they know about what to be looking for during the course of their inspections. Okay. Required documentation for racking. Right, so this is the documentation that you need to have for racking. So this would be a great thing to jot down to look for back at your workplace. Would be capacity chart, right? Do we have a chart to tell us what the capacity of our racking structure is? Either the original engineered drawings or a PSR or an engineer's report on the weight limits and the configuration of your racking structures. And again, you could have an exemption letter, inspection and maintenance reports. So they want to see that you are maintaining your racks in good condition, and also that you are inspecting your racking. So how often are you inspecting them? You should be inspecting them at least once a month. And then that there should be really good documentation that if there are any nonconformances, like anything that needs to be replaced, that there's good documentation to show that we are maintaining it in good condition. And then rack inspector proof of competency, right? Is there any proof that our inspectors are competent to be able to do that job? Okay. These are the required documents. So again, suggested next steps for racking. Create a rack safety program, right? Include inspection procedures, like a procedure maybe on how we're going to do inspections, who's going to do it, what we're looking for, nonconformances, how we're going to address nonconformances, the whole list of things that you should be creating for that. Ensure that you have updated rack documentation, right? Look for it now. A lot of times when I go into places and I ask for the documentation, some people think it's in engineering, some people think it's in health and safety or HR. Take a look for that now and make sure that you can find it. Organize and designate a competent racking team. Create a tool for how you're going to capture your inspections. Ensure that routine inspections are occurring, so make sure that they're done at least once a month, if not more, and make sure that you kind of have done a risk assessment, it's all stated in the CSA standard if you want to take a look at that more. Retain all completed rack inspections, provide to appropriate parties, and then correct any kind of nonconformances. So again, ensure that we are taking a look at our racking, and then if there is any damage that we deem unacceptable, that is fixed in a timely manner. When required, ask for help. Ask for a professional. It could be, an engineer. It could be the racking manufacturer. It could be, WSPS if you wanted to, or any other company that you feel would be a professional in your racking structures. Okay.
Carl, there was a sorry, just
sure.
to jump in. There was just a question on that last bullet. Maybe you could go back.
Oh, like what is a competent rack inspector?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the definition of a competent rack inspector, we're just going to go off of what the Ministry of Labor's definition of a competent person would be, right? Has skill, knowledge, and ability to organize the work is number one. Number two, they would know about the acts and regulations that would surround their job. So for the acts and regulations, maybe knowing about the CSA standards on racking, maybe taking the racking course because that checks off a lot of the boxes. And then the last one is knowing about any hazards, potential actual dangers or hazards to the individual around that job. So any kind of racking hazards, like what could happen if it's struck? What happens if it gets overloaded? Right? Those three things would kind of put that person in the competency realm. Now, the question I always like to ask is, who at the end of the day deems you competent? Let me throw that in the chat. Who at the end deems you a competent person? Does anybody know? At the end, it's the employer. Right, exactly, Chuck. Right, it's the employer who at the end of the day says, you know what, if you've gone through X, Y, and Z, we're going to deem you competent. Those are just some of the things that I suggest that that you could be looking for if you were to deem somebody a competent racking inspector. Okay, great questions. Absolutely. Next, we're going to look into loading docks. Right, so loading docks is probably one of the most overlooked areas of our workplace. Why is a loading dock one of the most overlooked areas of our business? Right, a lot of times it's purchased with the building. It's not considered with any new building design. That's kind of an afterthought. It's outside a lot, like it's an inside-outside kind of an area. Most don't really see it, And sometimes it's not even included in our workplace inspections. Sometimes the Joint Health and Safety Committee doesn't even go to the loading docks for some reason or other. So sometimes it does kind of get overlooked. Loading docks are often really busy. They have a lot of busy fork trucks or other vehicles that are in there. They're not really laid out the best sometimes. A lot of times they've been, set up one way and they're being used in a different way. They're not lit properly. I see this quite often where there's not adequate lighting in the loading dock areas. They're exposed to weather. So sometimes the seals around the transports are not very good. So you get, snow or ice or rain coming into the loading dock, which could create a lot of slips, trips, hazards. Again, it's located in places where it's difficult to communicate. So sometimes it might be very noisy. There might be a lot of distractions out there. Again, when you compile that with poor lighting, bad weather, it could be a real big disaster for a lot of workplaces for health and safety. Typical loading dock incidents, collapsing dock plates. So again, dock plates should be looked at. They should be serviced at least annually by a competent person. Typically that's done by a third party. Lift trucks falling off docks happens a little bit more than you would think, but we should be aware that lift trucks can fall off loading docks and act accordingly. Movement of the trailer away from the docks. So again, we should have some type of lock system when a trailer comes to your loading dock, whether it be like a dock lock system or whether it just be regular chocks. But there should be a process for how to verify that, how to make sure that it's being done properly, and that no driver goes into the trailer unless it's been secured. Okay. Collisions with fork truck to fork truck, people with fork truck, those types of things, and then a lift truck falling through the floor of the trailer. This is another thing that some companies have had to do is really make sure that they have a proper inspection procedure before fork trucks go onto the trailer to make sure that the floor of the trailer is actually safe enough for a driver to go onto. Okay. Suggested next steps for loading docks, right? Ensure vehicle restraints, lights, and wheels are chalked and being used. So my question to a lot of companies is who's responsible for that, right? So if you were going to be doing an audit on, let's say, your loading docks, I would be asking that question. Who is responsible to chalk or secure our trailers? And sometimes there's a little bit of confusion where sometimes people believe it's the truck driver's responsibility. Other people believe that it is the person who's going to be loading or unloading the trailer. Some people don't even know who's supposed to be doing it. Nobody is auditing it and nobody's enforcing it. So again, it's a really good question if you wanted to kind of do your own audit as to ask who is supposed to be doing that. Ensure there are floor markings, mirrors, and protective structures for pedestrians. I always hate to see it when people are walking around loading docks. I'm a very big believer that loading dock should be a restricted area and that nobody, unless you're authorized, should be within that area. And then if you are going to be walking through a loading dock, whether it be outside or inside, you should have like a high vis vest. We should have adequate lighting and there should be, pedestrian walkways or access points for pedestrians to try to minimize the risk of people coming in contact with vehicles. Ensure there's a designated pedestrian areas and walkways, right? Whether it be outside, I've seen it where there's parking lots outside where pedestrians have to travel on the outside to get into the building. How do we want them to go through that parking lot? Is there a way that we would like them to go? Maybe we could paint some really good pedestrian walkways out in the parking lot to direct traffic on where we would like to funnel them away from the loading dock areas. Try to eliminate blind spots, right, as best we can, so that the drivers of the transport trucks or the forklift operators, don't have to guess if there's somebody there or not. Having mirrors is fantastic. Having loads, low enough so that people can see around corners are always really good. Ensure there are proper inspection and maintenance of dock plates. So, right, the employers to maintain their equipment in good condition. So inspection reports should be available to show that we are maintaining our equipment in good condition, such as dock plates. How often are we getting it serviced? Is there a record of that in the workplace? All those types of things should be available to an inspector if they were to ask for it. And then ensure that trailers are inspected before loading. So again, it should be a process where if there is a trailer, there's some type of process where we're going to ensure that it's secured to the loading dock, that the floor has been looked at, that there's no other hazards that a driver would interact with when they're loading or unloading of a transport. Okay. Conveyors, right? Conveyors is another one that is a critical area of our material handling. These ones are specifically dangerous, especially when we are doing maintenance on them. Most injuries occur on conveyors when they're cleaning and maintaining conveyors. The one I see quite often is when they're trying to pull out a jam. Because what happens when there's a jam on a conveyor, right? People think that they can just get their fingers in really quick and release the jam. And sometimes that's not always the case. Typically between the drum and the belt, or between the belt and the roller. So as you guys can see here, this is the main area that we have concerns with. There's in-running nip hazards. Things can get caught in here, and these are areas that we should be focusing on as well. Suggested next steps for conveyors, right? Ensure there's adequate safeguarding of moving parts. So again, we should be doing an audit or an inspection of all of our conveyors. There is really good best practices for conveyor safety, which is on the link down there below. That really kind of goes into what types of things we should be looking at for our conveyors and ensuring that they're properly guarded, right? There should never be a time where I could stick my finger or a piece of clothing in the conveyor and get it drawn in, right? So ensure there's adequate safeguarding of moving parts, right? So, if you're going to attend the next session with Mike Wilson on lockout tagout, he's probably going to get into a little bit of, if you see a moving part, it should be locked out properly so that there's no danger of that. Ensure that proper inspections and maintenance procedures are being completed, right? Do we have a proper inspection procedure for our conveyors? And then it also our maintenance procedures. So if we are going to have maintenance done on conveyors, what is our procedure for locking it out? What is our procedure for removing the safeguarding? What is our procedure for putting that safeguarding back in the proper position? Review the equipment to see if it can be designed so that adjustments can be maintained outside of the danger zone. So right here, you can see on the picture, there's a grease point, which has been brought out of the actual guarding so that I don't need to remove the guarding to grease this conveyor. I've brought it outside so I can grease it with the guarding still on, okay? Ensure that employees must access danger zones, that they follow our procedures, right? Lockout policies and procedures, and then even train. Do we have proper training that can be shown in the workplace for cleaning, maintaining, unjamming of equipment? Do we have procedures for all of that type of stuff? Okay. Our final one for today, everybody. So I'm hoping that you guys have your questions all lined up for us to hit us on the way after this, but it's cranes, right? Cranes is another really big one that we see quite often. For this, some of the hazards that we might see is that the cranes exceed the capacity that they're allotted for, right? People are lifting way more than it's supposed to. The other part is we're exceeding the capacity of the ropes, chains, slings, or other hardware that is used on the cranes. So you have to make sure that all of your lifting devices match up with how much you're going to be lifting. Improper rigging. So we don't see this very often because quite a lot of the places I go to, they've done a really good job with training. But there are times when they're not rigged properly, and that typically to me shows that there's not a really good training procedure or a training program for operators. People are using defective hardware, like the hardware, like the chains or the slings especially, are broken. Maybe they're ripped. Maybe they're not, in full compliance, or they should be thrown out. They're swinging loads. So again, I've seen quite a bit in my years in health and safety. I've seen it where the cranes have to go over to a certain area to pick up a load, and then when they pick it up, it swings in the other direction. So what I would ask for you is to take a look at how people are, using their cranes, making sure that they're being used in a proper manner, and that we're auditing and enforcing those. And then again, like we mentioned at the very beginning, loads should never be over top of a worker. This goes from forklifts all the way to cranes. Nothing, should be suspended, should be over top of a worker. So ensuring that the pathways are clear. I've seen some really neat lights lately on cranes that shine the area of the shadow where you are not allowed to be when the crane is moving. So there's a lot of really cool technological advances that have come out there just to kind of give people a heightened awareness of like the danger zone around the crane. But again, load should never be above a worker. Okay. Again, crane training is crucial, right? Rigging training is crucial in preventing injuries and property damage. Forces change with the angle of the lift, and then rigging improperly excludes huge forces and hardware failure. So again, one of the big reasons why there are crane incidents is because it's not being rigged properly, because at the end of the day, maybe they were not trained properly. So suggested next steps for cranes, right? So look at additional smart features. They have come a long way with additional features for cranes. So if you have like an older crane that maybe doesn't have some of these, take a look and see if these would be something that you could implement. Prevent lifting over specific areas. So there are sensors that will not allow you to lift over a certain area. There's a sway control features that help with if the load was going to sway back and forth. Ensure that you have adequate crane capacities. So we should know what the maximum loads that we're going to be lifting are, and ensure that our lifting devices can match those capacities as well. Ensure that workers are using appropriate hardware. So maybe doing an audit of our hardware and ensuring that they're all load rated for the applicable loads. Look at installing alarms for overweight controls. I've seen some pretty neat ones where if you do load over a certain capacity, there will be alarms for that overweight lifting. Ensure all operators receive training. I would actually, take it a step further and, audit it. Take a look at who is doing crane lifting and verify that they have training that is current and it's up to date, and that we know as an organization how to look for that type of information. Is it readily available? If the MLITSD was to come on site, would they be able to pull those training records easily? Okay. Ensure there's sufficient load rating capacity signage, so signs for what the capacities are. Ensure that the inspection of hardware is done every time it's used. So again, inspect to make sure that we're inspecting our cranes before each load, right? Before each lift, there should be some type of inspection being done. We should be taking a look for those as well and making sure that that's being properly done. Ensure the annual inspection reports are being completed. So annually, we should have our lifting devices inspected by a competent third party. Making sure that those records are available and that, if there are any nonconformances, then they are taken care of right away. And then audit and enforce that cranes are not being lifted over any workers. Again, we've talked about this over and over. I wanted to reiterate it because it was one of the big topics that was found by the MLITSD. So it's another really big topic for us to look at. Just some resource hubs. So again, on the WSPS website, there is a lot of great resources on manual and mechanical material handling. There are free downloads from anything from checklists to audit inspections to videos. So if you ever want to look at that, there is a link there at the bottom, which we could also send you later on. Final takeaway, especially for me, again, I didn't want this to be a long, drawn-out process, but I really wanted to have a lot of time for question and answer. But take a proactive approach to looking for material handling hazards in your workplace. I suggest maybe even having a blitz for your Joint Health and Safety Committee. Have the topics that we talked about today, maybe any takeaways, and give it to them and some leaders, and do like a blitz on all these topics and see if there's any gaps that maybe you have at your workplace. Take a look at your procedures to ensure that they're being followed and enforced, right? What are our procedures for distracted driving or distracted pedestrians or, forklift handling, cranes, all those types of things? Take a look at what your policies and procedures say and making sure that we're actually following those. Ensure that your joint health is looking for and aware of the hazards, right? Another great thing is your joint health is doing inspections or on a monthly basis, if not other frequencies. But do they know what they're supposed to be looking for? This could be a really big resource for you to be able to enlist the help of them to make sure that they're upskilled and that they are looking for the things that they should be looking for and not just the obvious. Use tools and templates to audit your process. So again, take a look. You can Google it. You can take a look at a whole bunch of really good resources for maybe like an inspection tool or a tool to audit your process and make sure that it's all being documented. Verify competency of operators and inspectors. So verify the competency of your fork truck operators, your crane operators, and then people who are doing your inspections, maybe your inspections for your racking. Ensure appropriate documentation is retained, right? Pre-use inspections, make sure that there's a full circle for that the operator is doing the pre-use inspection, the supervisor is taking a look at those pre-use inspections and then fixing any non-conformances in a timely manner. Annual inspections, training records, and then engineered documents, right? So make sure that all of your paperwork is in order and that you know where to find them. So if there was a blitz or if there was an inspector that came on site, that you have all those documents readily available. And then seek additional assistance if you have any concerns. If you find any gaps within your system, there's a lot of resources for you to be able to reach out and say, hey, I might need a walkthrough. I might need some help with this. Is there any way that I can get any help with that? Okay, that's one of the big takeaways. We just kind of wanted to get through some high level things for you to be able to audit this on your own. Okay. How we can help, again, there's a lot of consulting, training, the WSAB Excellence Program. If you were a newer company and you didn't have any really good policies and procedures, the Excellence Program is really, really good on getting companies started down the road of what kind of basis could we have for our company and kind of move it forward. Okay. So that kind of concludes, everybody, our little safety connection. I hope there was a lot of kind of topics that we covered today that might have piqued your interest. We're going to kind of turn it back over to Jack to see if there's any questions that we have for us, and then Don and I can start answering some questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Carl. If anybody has any questions for Carl or for Don, please go ahead and you can put that in the chat window. We'll wait to see if anyone has anything. I maybe, Don, I could start with a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah, in your opinion or your experience, what do you think some of the big safety concerns within the steel industry lately are?
Well, what we're seeing is, and they were brought up during some of the slide presentations, is employers are spending the time developing programs for material handling. So like movement of material using lift trucks, cranes, overhead cranes. They're taking the time, spending money to train the workers who are going to do those positions and that task. And then when we're attending an accident or a complaint, what we're finding is that the employer has documented all their training. They have written measures and procedures or policies, but when it gets out onto the floor, those policies and programs are really not being enforced. So the workers do have the training. Sometimes they don't always follow the training, or they start developing bad habits over time. The supervisors are on the floor when we talk to them. Some of them don't even get the same training as the crane operators or as the lift truck operators, because it's not part of the role. They're there to supervise, but it would be really nice to see the supervisors receive some sort of the same training or the similar training, so they know when the crane operator is moving loads close to other workers, or passing a load above another worker, or when forklift operators are not doing what they're supposed to be doing regarding their training.
I would agree with that 100%, Don. Absolutely. Yep.
And we know since COVID, there's a shortage of workers. Workers are coming and going. And we're finding that the employer is hiring people to be crane operators, lift truck operators, but when they look at their resume, the worker said, yeah, they're 10 years being a lift truck operator, but when they come into the workplace, the worker was always using a counterbalance lift truck, but now they have Raymond reach trucks. So the training, when you bring anybody in, should be specific to the equipment that you're using. And that the worker is actually familiar with it and can operate it safely. So we see that all the time. Yeah, I'm a lift truck operator for 15 years, but they never ever used the Raymond reach truck. And this was one of the very first slides that the distracted worker. So I've been in Toronto the last couple of weeks and around the Dundas Yonge Street area, and I cannot believe there's hundreds of people, they have their earbuds in, they're on their cell phones, and they're moving with the pedestrian traffic and basically hoping that the drivers on the road are actually seeing him and going to stop for him because they don't look up. And we see this in workplaces now too. Cell phones, they either use them as part of the work process. Supervisors will have cell phones. Even lift truck operators will have an order picker or a tablet on their lift truck now that they're looking at to pick the next orders. And the pedestrians, they see the lift truck, but they really need to make sure that the lift truck operator sees them. And the employer should have a policy, either you give the pedestrian the right of way and the lift truck operator stops, or the pedestrian has to wait until the lift truck operator moves past them and they're no longer a hazard. Because sometimes it's a guessing game. Are you going to stop or not? And then in most cases, it doesn't end well for the worker or the pedestrian.
Or the cyclist, right? I think there was a fatality in Toronto, or there was a cyclist hit by a truck going into a work site recently.
And then some of the fatalities that we had when COVID was going on and afterwards, most employers have video surveillance. We ask them when we're looking at the video, what's the purpose of it? Well, we're supposed to monitor our employees. Sometimes it's for theft. But if they were to spend a little bit of time looking at the video, they would be able to see when workers are working in an unsafe manner because it's consistent, right? They just repeat it again and again. There's supervisors on the floor that are either observing them or not, who have an opportunity to educate and correct that worker. So they start working in a safe manner. So if you have video or surveillance, you might want to look at it in respect to health and safety and ensure that all the training you're providing to your workers to work safe, they're actually following it.
Yeah. There's a few questions in the chat. Maybe we'll start taking those. Sure. The first one is maybe Carl, we could start with you on this one. Are there any standards around double forklift moves?
Yeah, there's nothing specific on that. Again, you have to be able to transport the load in a safe manner. I don't ever recommend doing them unless that's the absolute necessity around doing it. Like there's no other options for doing it. Then you're going to have competent signalers with you because somebody might not be able to see where they're traveling. You have to have a procedure around what that looks like so there's no other hazards in the way. Again, it's not definitely a common thing to have happened. I would try to avoid it at all costs if you can, but there's nothing that I've ever seen that says that you can't do that.
Okay. Don, do you have anything to add or any thoughts there?
Well, what we would do, and actually somebody put it in the chat there is the CSA standard, and what we would look at is the owner's manual and even the training being provided to the operators. I haven't come across any owner's manual that allows what they call as a double lift or a tandem lift, because you just can't control one operator and the other, and each lift truck is different. They would, they're not identical all the time. You might have two completely different models. So we would never allow that. But you did bring up a good point. Every now and then, there may be a requirement to do what we call as a tandem lift. Mm-hmm. We would expect, depending on the size of load, maybe to have a professional engineer come down, prepare an engineering report. One of my colleagues, when she worked at General Electric, they would do what they call once or twice a year an engineered lift. So there was measures and procedures, there was specific training, a professional engineer came down, designed how the lift was going to go, how high it could go, what the speed it was going to be moving at, but it wasn't a regular workplace practice. And they brought an engineer into that because they were only doing it once or twice a year.
Yeah.
The next question, there's a couple of questions about this. So the first is, where does the ministry stand with the use of hook latches when it puts workers at a greater risk to use them. And then somebody else said earlier in the presentation, you mentioned orders around not having latches on crane hooks. The steel industry has some unique applications where a latch may not always be a feasible option. Is there specifically a regulation around this, or is this
So
something the ministry is now looking for?
we're looking at the type of lifts that are being done in the workplace. So if your hook does come with a latch, there's the expectation that you will maintain it in good condition. So sometimes we'll see a latch, a hook and a latch come in, and the workers pop the hook because they just want to latch it all the time. Well, that's defeating a safety feature on that, so the load doesn't slip off the hook. We also realize that depending on the size of the load and the size of the hook, they just don't come with latches. We've had a couple of recent fatalities involving lifting where there were no latches on the hooks. But working with the employer, there are suppliers that will provide large hooks with latches. Some of them are actually magnetic release, so the operator doesn't even have to touch the latch to remove the load. That it can be they use a magnet to close and open that latch. So there are options. If it does not come with a latch, because they just don't make it that way, there's no expectation that we would ever issue an order to put a latch on, but we would look at other means to protect the workers why that has a load. So if it was to slip off the hook, what prevents it from striking the floor or coming off and coming in contact with the worker? So there may be additional safety chains applied to it or other safety precautions. If it's an extremely large load and they just can't do what I just said, then we would expect that there'd be no workers in the area why that load is being moved from point A to point B, and that the crane operator, if they're working from a pendant, is at a safe distance also.
Okay, thank you. Carl, maybe you could start with this one. There's a question about how often should we retrain crane operators?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that one quite often. Again, there's nothing that specifically says how often you need to retrain them. I guess in my eyes, it depends. It depends on how often they're using the cranes. Typically, I see every 2 to 3 years they would go for like a refresher. But again, it would just depend on situations, the hazards that might be present at the workplace. Some companies do it every year, right? They just do like an annual refresher on their crane training. They might have like an internal trainer that they could do that with. So it really kind of all depends on what is reasonable and the hazards that would be present in the workplace. So that's what I would say.
Anything to add, Don? I concur with what
And
Carl has to say.
and actually, what Carl said is a really good point. So if you're bringing in an organization to train your crane operators, and they have the package, what we would look at is if the third party providing that training recommends that you do crane refresher every year or every 3 years, we would use that as a reasonable precaution for the employer to take, because the act is, it says provide information instruction to a worker. It doesn't say how often, but what we would look at is perhaps the manufacturer's recommendations for the nature and type of crane or lifting device, who's ever coming in to do the training or delivering that training, what they will recommend, and we would use that as a reasonable precaution for the employer to take.
Great. A question here. Is there a minimum safe distance from elevated loads and elevated liquid loads?
Like, would that be storing them on like a racking structure or just like elevate? I'm just trying to think elevated, like in what context would that be?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I don't, Owen, if you're still on, he says, while they're being moved by a crane.
Oh.
So minimum safe distance from elevated loads and elevated liquid loads when they're moved, while they're being moved by a crane.
Okay. Yeah. Again, it would just depend on what the liquid is, like I guess, and in the hazard zone. So like what the spill area would be, right? So if we're just transporting water, let's say, and it falls, there's a lot less of a risk. Oh, molten steel and iron. Yeah. So you would have to take a look at that splash zone. So if it was to fall, what would the risk level be of the people in and around that area? So that's probably not going to be a good thing to have fall. So there should be some type of area around there where people cannot be, so that I would know the splash zone of that.
Yeah, and the molten metal section in the industrial reg speaks to all that also. So they could use that as a reference.
Great, thank you. Question here, do we have any standards on loading docks or shipping receiving areas?
Not that I'm aware of. Don, do you know of any standards for that?
I'm not aware of any standards either.
No?
We would just expect that the loading docks and the equipment used in the loading dock is being maintained in good condition according to the manufacturer's instructions or recommendations.
Okay. Thank you. Don, maybe a question for you about MLI TSD inspector site visits. What advice would you give a company looking to be proactive when it comes to preparing for an on-site visit?
Yeah, mostly for the steel industry or the industrial sector, we show up unannounced. But if you need the appropriate people available to answer the inspector or have people there who can answer or ask the appropriate questions to the inspector, we don't mind waiting. There's lots of stuff we can do. We can do an admin review while we're waiting for the subject matter experts or the knowledgeable people from the different areas of the plant to show up and talk. We always encourage the employer and the committee members and the health and safety rep to ask us questions, whether it's pertaining to an act or a reg or a procedure. We'll provide what we would look at in an enforcement approach. If we don't have the answer available, then that inspector will usually reach out to the regional program coordinators or their RPCs and to find assistance in the proper answer. And we also have engineers that we may ask those questions to, but we always encourage employers and the workplace parties, ask us as many questions as you want. And if they're there and they're doing enforcement and they end up issuing, like, for example, an order, ask the inspector why they're getting the order. And then talk about the compliance state and how to comply with the order. Whether you need 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 days, have that discussion with the inspector, because nothing should be a surprise when the inspector leaves. They write their field visit report and they come back in and they deliver the report, whether it's either being issued orders or even the content of the narrative. Everything that should already have been discussed, so there's no surprises. And I always encourage employers that when you review the report, you may understand the orders and the narrative, but within the day or 2 or 3 or days, 4 days later, when you start looking at complying with those orders, if you have questions, reach out to that inspector again, and that inspector will be more than happy either to answer your questions over the phone or re-attend the workplace so you actually know what the content of the order is and the meaning behind that.
Great, good advice. Thank you.
Good.
There was a follow-up question around the minimum heights over the liquid. Owen is asking if you know what number in the regulation is the molten metal regulation. Do you guys know off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't either. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I've never really had to look that one up. I'm sure we could find it pretty easily though.
Yeah.
Either Carl or Don, or maybe both, what are some key takeaways you would like today's participants to take back to their workplace from today's Safety Connection?
Do you want me to go first, Don?
Sure.
I would just like to, I would just like to the people to take a look at their own workplaces and look for especially with the topics that we talked about today, some of the gaps that you might have, like have a specific lens just on material handling. Maybe get like a checklist, or maybe get some type of audit, and use the people at your workplace to do a complete audit of your material handling processes, and really dig deep. Like look at your enforcement, look at your policies and procedures, look at your training, look at your documentation. Take a look at all that stuff and kind of have a real focus for it, and see, do we have any gaps, and how can we address those gaps? That's probably what I would want to have people take away from this.
Yeah, and I just encourage that when an inspector does show up, ask some questions, whether it's related to the visit or not. You can always reach out to our call center, and we have technical advisors that will be able to answer questions over the phone or be able to respond in email. The Ministry of Labor has a WebOsh page where you can submit your questions via email, and they are either answered by the technical advisors, or they're sent out to the RPCs to answer. So you will get an answer back, whether either on the phone or through WebOsh. You have the inspectors, they'll be leaving their business cards, or phone numbers are all on the field visit report. You can call them. I encourage employers to send me emails or give me phone calls if they have questions. We'd rather have the questions being asked than have to come because there's been an incident or an event.
Great.
I agree, Don. I was going to say, let's try and be proactive. I always hate being reactive to things where people get injured and then they're like, oh, we should be looking at our pedestrian traffic and those types of things. Let's try and be proactive with these types of hazards.
Great. Looks like somebody, Chuck answered Owen's question around this. It's section 87 for the molten metal and regulation 851. Thank you. Ted, you're just a few seconds too late. Thank you for looking into that.
Good job, Ted.
Yeah. Any other questions from the group before we say goodbye? Oh, looks like we've answered everything. There was a few comments in a couple of comments in there around that double lift from one of our specialists, Norm Kramer there. And again, once the recording of today's session is compiled, released, everyone participating today will receive an email with the invitation to download the video. So I'd like to thank Carl Bonello and Don McInnes for today's session.
Thank you.
Thank you to our participants for joining us today. And we do have one more session on lockout tagout in the steel industry on June the 13th. And hopefully we'll see you there. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.